Good afternoon. Welcome to the IISS. I'm Virginia Comolli, Senior Fellow for Security and Development here at the Institute. Today I'm here to introduce Dr. Loretta Napoleoni, who is a well-known international expert on countering terrorism financing. An economist by training, Dr. Napoleoni is a prolific author who throughout her career has interviewed several members of terrorist organizations ranging from the Italian Red Brigade to Al-Qaeda. And she has recently produced a book, Merchants of Men, in which she explores how the business of kidnap for ransom and more recently the migration crisis have been exploited by jihadis to fund their terrorist activities. Today, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Napoleoni here with us to share the findings and conclusions of her most recent research. Dr. Napoleoni will speak on the record for about 20 minutes, after which I'll invite comments and questions from the floor. Here at ISS, we are very much interested in the link between criminal and terrorist activities, and so I have no doubt there will be a very stimulating discussion afterwards. But that's enough for me. Dr. Napoleoni, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for inviting me also. At lunchtime, this is not going to be a light discussion, but these are the times we live in. So I am an expert in terrorist financing. I've been analyzing this phenomenon for the last 30 years. And what I can tell you is that this is an area where our counterterrorism is particularly weak. We're always one step behind the way criminal and terrorist organizations fund themselves. So this book is the result of 10 years of investigation in the field of kidnapping, but also human trafficking linked all to terrorism. And what I have discovered is actually that after 9/11, because of our response to 9/11, the jihadis have developed an alternative form of terrorist financing. And in particular, this form of terrorist financing is related to kidnapping, so the ransom from kidnapping and the trafficking of migrants to other Europe or other Western countries. So this is almost a paradox that we put in place after 9/11, very complex legislation in order to stop the flow of money inside the international banking system, and that legislation prompted an alternative form of terrorist financing. So the money used to circulate inside the international banking system, but they stopped doing that right after 9/11. And yet, we are continuing to think that we can stop terrorist financing simply by patrolling the movement of funds from one bank to another. So I'm going to tell you the story of, this is the beginning actually of the book. The story starts with the introduction of the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act as a financial legislation, this financial legislation allows the U.S. monetary authorities to monitor dollar transactions everywhere in the world. So that put the Colombian cartel in a very serious situation because until then, the cocaine trade to Europe went through the United States, from the U.S. to Europe, and the money laundering was done primarily in the U.S. and in U.S. dollars. So suddenly, this cannot happen anymore. So the cartel had to find another way to money launder the profits, but also you had to find another way to actually ship the cocaine to Europe. And that way was presented by the Italian organized crime, the 'Ndrangheta. The 'Ndrangheta actually said, well, you can ship to West Africa, and from West Africa, bring the cocaine to the shores of North Africa into Italy, and then we'll sell the cocaine in Europe, but also we'll money launder the profits with the new European currency, which is, of course, the euro. So the euro was ideal all of a sudden the dollar, which is an internationally trading currency, could not be used anymore. And then, we have an alternative, which is, of course, the European currency. So this was an absolutely fantastic business. So what they did from Venezuela, they would ship the cocaine to West Africa. Guinea-Bissau is there. And then, from Guinea-Bissau, they would move all the way to Libya. Now you can see but they didn't know, what the cartel didn't know, and the Drangheta didn't know, that along those routes, which are the old Sahara smuggling routes, there were several groups of former mujahideen from Algeria, primarily, who had been pushed down to the south after the military coup in Algeria. And these mujahideen were living, smuggling products from Algeria all the way down to West Africa, cigarettes, for example, or any other product that were cheaper in Algeria than in West Africa. So they didn't know, the cartel and the Drangheta, that they could use these people to smuggle the cocaine. So this was a welcome surprise. And then all of a sudden we get these groups of former mujahideen who now are jihadists, because of 9/11. But in reality, these are criminals. These are people who have lived for a very long time through criminal activity, carrying the cocaine. This was very good for them, because all of a sudden they had enough money in order to increase their recruitment, but also to establish themselves in certain strategic areas. For example, you see Gao is in Mali. So from Gao north of Mali, it was all controlled by them by 2003. Gao was their headquarters, let's call it this way. So in 2003, a group of these jihadis, former mujahideen, decides to branch off into another business in order to fund themselves. And this business is kidnapping. They had never done that before. No jihadist organization had ever thought about kidnapping as a form of terrorist financing. Anyway, so they kidnapped 32 Europeans between Mauritania and Mali. Now, Europeans used to go on holiday in Mali, for example, to visit Timbuktu. They used to go trekking in Mauritania. So it was easy to kidnap 32 people. They carried out the negotiation, and they got 6 million euros. Now, 6 million euros in that part of the world, it's a lot of money. So all of a sudden, they thought, this is actually a better business than smuggling cocaine, because if you think about smuggling cocaine, they only carry the cocaine, so they get a very small percentage of the total business. But this kidnapping, they control the entire business, so they get all the money. So in terms of profitability, kidnapping is actually higher than smuggling cocaine. So they decided that this was going to be the most important activity that they were carrying. So the situation lasted until 2008, 2007, 2008. Then all of a sudden it became very difficult to find people in those regions to snatch. This is when they thought, this is a good business, but it's a short-term business. We need to find a long-term business. And this long-term business, of course, was smuggling migrants. Because in the meantime, this area had been increasingly being destabilized, also by the presence of the cocaine. So there were a lot of people that wanted actually to travel all the way to Libya in order to cross into Italy. So those smuggling routes, which had been used initially for cigarettes and other products, then for cocaine, then to kidnap people, become the smuggling routes, the most important smuggling routes for the migrants. Now, the organization who actually did all of that, so the first kidnapping and then the branching off, into the smuggling of people is called Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. So Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb used the money of the smuggling of cocaine and of the kidnapping in order to begin its own activity. It didn't get any money from the historical Al-Qaeda. It didn't get any money from the sponsor of Al-Qaeda. It is completely self-funded. This is the first time we see something like this. No other jihadist organization has ever been able to self-fund itself totally through any activity, in particular criminal activity. So what happened was that when Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb started to its own activity and launched this message to the world that it existed and how it funded, the real Al-Qaeda decided that this was a very good way to fund a terrorist organization. I mean, let's not forget that at that time, Al-Qaeda was in serious troubles. The leadership was stuck in Tora Bora. They didn't have any more the funding that they had before. So the idea that they could launch a message to the other jihadists about terrorist financing through kidnapping was actually very good. And this is exactly what they did. So the model of terrorist financing from the Sahel was replicated everywhere. It was replicated in Iraq after the invasion of Iraq. The first kidnapping took place in 2004. There were 2 Italian aid workers. But where it really took off and where the model evolved was in Somalia with the pirates. So the piracy started more or less around 2006, 2007. But the model of piracy is a little bit different because it's much more expensive to hijack a cargo and to kidnap the crew than it is actually to snatch a foreigner trekking in Mauritania. So the pirates needed a large investment to start the business. And this investment came from the diaspora. So the Somali diaspora started investing money so that the pirates could actually carry out the hijacking. When the payment of the ransom arrived, then the investors would collect the largest part of the ransom. So we're talking about 70 to 75% return. The rest of the money would be divided among the pirates, and part of the money would also be spent to pay the debt. So this is another very interesting element. It is the pirates could not carry on a long-term kidnapping or hijacking without borrowing from the local community. So you see, this is a classic capitalist model of leverage. You leverage the capital from the diaspora. You leverage the running cost of the kidnapping through the local community. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. But also that explains why the local population did not regard this kind of activity as a criminal activity, as an illegal activity, because this became the only sustenance for the local population. And the same kind of phenomena we're seeing in the Sahel. These are destabilized areas where there is no other way to survive. You either become a jihadist, you either become a pirate, or you become a migrant. Now, the same story we see happening again in Somalia. By 2012, 2011, all the ships that were sailing through the Red Sea were traveling with heavily armed guards on board, so it became very difficult to hijack. At that point, the pirates turn into partners of the traffickers. There was a massive migration, an exodus similar to the one we've seen in West Africa coming from East Africa. So people were trying to reach the Gulf states, the rich Gulf states where they could find employment. So the pirates became traffickers. Identical, absolutely identical model. So West Africa, East Africa, everybody moves, but the direction is either Europe or it is, the Arabic Peninsula. So rich countries. So we see the same phenomenon in Syria, identical story, with a little bit of difference here. So when the civil war starts, the kidnapping becomes the primary form of self-funding of the rebels, and the rebels being the jihadists, but also the Free Syrian Army, and the Assad regime. The Assad regime, the police and the army would kidnap rich Syrian, put them in prison and ask the family for a ransom. As soon as, of course, people were released, they would go abroad. So this is also a business, a short-term business. For what concerned the rebels would kidnap the journalists. For example, they would go inside Syria embedded with them, and then they would get a ransom. But then again, this is a short-term business, because all of a sudden the media stopped sending correspondence. The freelancers became the primary victims, and then eventually, the Islamic State, took over the entire business and started beheading people, and this is when the business ended. There are two elements here which are quite new. The first element is the secondary market of hostages, because the Islamic State and al-Nusra did not engage themselves in kidnapping directly. They were too busy fighting their own war. So they would buy the hostages. We haven't seen anything like that in Somalia or in the Sahel. We saw groups snatching from each other hostages, but there was never a secondary market, so this is a new phenomenon. The Islamic State also bought people not necessarily to negotiate with their own countries a ransom. They bought people to kill them. So an hostage became worth more dead than alive, and this is for political reasons. They also showed a remarkable understanding of how the business of negotiating hostages is conducted in the West, which means that they talk to each other, the various kidnappers, but also possibly that some of the people that were in charge of the kidnapping negotiation for the Islamic State had been involved in previous kidnapping. They knew, for example, that governments are in competition with each other to get their hostages out before anybody else. So they use that knowledge to maximize their return, so to maximize the amount of ransom that they received from each single hostage. So interesting how, in the space of 15 years, the model of terrorist financing becomes more and more sophisticated, and it evolves. Now, of course, the Islamic State also bought the hostages for financial reasons. So they got between $75 and $80 million from the ransom of the hostages that they actually exchange. And again, this is not small cash. But again, this is a short-term business. Then by 2015, so beginning of 2015, most of the hostages had been released or they had been beheaded. There were no major companies sending anybody media company sending anybody, and even the freelancers had began to disappear from Syria. And here is when the smuggling of migrants started to take off. Same story. Several jihadis began using their SUV that they got from the various sponsors to cross people over from Aleppo, especially from the north of Syria into Turkey for like $2,000. But then we see by 2000 and summer 2015, we see really a massive business taking place because of the opening of the borders in Europe. All of a sudden, we have groups who are specialized in crossing over into Turkey, bringing migrants just across the border with the same vehicles. They would then come back and bring back any product that they needed to smuggle of necessity inside the caliphate. For this kind of business, of course, they had to pay a tax to get out for each migrant, a tax to come in for the products. And the Islamic State in the summer of 2015 was actually netting $500,000 per day out of this business. Now you would wonder why people cross over the caliphate, and the answer is very simple. The caliphate was, a very large territory controlled by one group. So you had to pay one tax. If you were crossing somewhere else, for example, on the western side of the caliphate, then that territory was divided in various groups. You had the warlords, you had jihadis. So instead of paying one tax, you had to pay several taxes. And you never know what's happened at these roadblocks. You may get, the young kid who is nervous that, he has his finger on, the machine gun, and then all of a sudden, something bad happens. So there was this kind of security in crossing over the caliphate. So prices. Well, these are prices of 2015, 2016. So you can see that we're not talking again about small cash. What I also have discovered in doing this research is that there is a new model of criminality which has taken off in Europe. This model of criminality, to a certain extent, mirrors the model of criminality and jihadists that we're seeing either in Africa or we're seeing in Syria. It is totally decentralized. So while before, think about the cocaine business, right? So the cocaine business, we have a cartel, we have the ndrangheta, and then we have people carrying the cocaine in the middle. But we're talking about two highly pyramidal organized crimes that control a very large territory and an incredibly large business. Here, it's not like that at all, because here you have several groups. So you have, the small criminal group that carries the people from one place to another, from one border to another border, and then they leave them there. Another group will take over all of a sudden and take them to the next border. So it's not integrated. The migrants that leaves, let's say, somebody that leaves Aleppo, it doesn't know how many groups he will have to pay in order to get all the way to Germany. I mean, of course, if he's lucky and he gets somebody that will give him a passport, a real passport, to fly from Istanbul all the way to Sweden, will pay $10,000. That's it. But most of them cannot get so easily. Also, most of them do not have that kind of money in cash right away. So how is this criminality constructed? Well, what I've discovered is that it's the same is the former migrants. Of course, there is good and evil everywhere. So some of the people that are migrated before would become the one who facilitate the smuggler of their own people coming from the same country in the territory that they know. So you get the Syrians in Bulgaria, for example, would become the one who traffic the Syrians across Bulgaria, with the help, of course, of few criminal groups in Bulgaria. But the actual link, it goes through the same countries, because these people do not speak foreign languages. So it's a completely new criminality. And this criminality is kept alive by the internet. Facebook, Twitter, this is how they move. So you reach the border, you cross, you are in Athens, all of a sudden you go on the Facebook page of so-and-so because somebody told you. If you go on that Facebook page, and then you get all the names and all the people and where they are that can cross you over from Athens to Italy or to any other destination. Then you go to these places, you interview them, you talk to them, and then you choose with whom you're going. It's all like that. Very, very difficult to penetrate this kind of system. So anyway, to conclude, I think this is not a problem. See, these are the roots. This is not a humanitarian crisis only. I don't think we should approach it as a humanitarian crisis only. This is a security issue. And we have to look at this as a security issue. I mean, not because ISIS is going to put its fighters on a boat to Italy to blow up the Vatican. Absolutely not. But because this criminality is penetrating our own society, and that's number one threat, because there are too many people to be absorbed, integrated properly in our society. So whoever does not get integrated becomes a reservoir, an important reservoir of potential indoctrination by the various jihadist groups. And finally, the idea that we're going to stop them before reaching Europe in sort of refugees camp, which is run like concentration camp, is completely wrong. Because there we will be breeding the next generation of jihadists, for sure. So I would say change completely the narrative. Let's talk about security before we talk about a humanitarian crisis. That would be much more realistic. And I think, also that will achieve much more in terms of also of action, participation, than only talking about humanitarian crisis. There are many, many humanitarian crises in the world, and we cannot solve them all, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Tier from NATO. 2 points but linked. Every European NATO Western state that pays a ransom is effectively de facto state sponsoring terrorism.
Yeah.
And therefore, based on that and your concluding comments, our only option is basically not to take any refugees anymore. Is that correct?
Well, I think it is on. Okay. Well, I think you're absolutely right that every single government that pays ransom is funding terrorists, because we know where the ransom goes. But you will have to find a government that will admit that, and I haven't seen one yet. The other thing about the refugees, I think there's no way that we can build Fortress Europe. Even if you say, no, I'm not going to attack anybody else, they will keep coming. I mean, in 2016, we don't know what is the total number, because, of course, they didn't come in 2015 officially. So we know that in 2015, between 1.5 1.8 million enter Europe because they were registered, fingerprinted, and all this stuff. How many did they come in 2016? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. So, no, I think we need a policy. I think we need a policy. Personally, I think the only way forward is to prevent them from coming, meaning, why are they coming? They're coming because, their countries are falling apart. They're coming because they have no future. So instead of spending money in ransom, why don't we invest the money there in order for their economy to take off? There are lots of opportunities, especially for European capital in Africa. So why don't we do that instead of quickly? But there are also many other reasons why certain countries pay ransom. Ransom sometimes is just a way to do business in certain countries. Look at Libya, in Italy.
Thank you. I'd like actually to follow up on that, if I may, and I totally agree that Western countries should help their partners in the developing world so that crises don't escalate and people don't feel the need to leave their home countries. So, but that's one side of the story. But what would be your recommendation for immediate actions that would help us address the current crisis? You mentioned at the end of your presentation the need to look at this as a security challenge. So what would be your security recommendations?
Well, I think in the long term, for sure, having a sort of Marshall Plan for those regions in order to prevent their economy from spiraling down. I think in the very short run, we need to pacify certain areas which are the key areas. For sure, Syria. We need an agreement, and we need an agreement where we cannot ignore the presence of countries like Russia, of the role of Iran. We also need a decision about the Kurdish question. We cannot just fund Kurdish armed organizations because they're fighting the Islamic State, ignoring what is the position of Turkey, so the position of Iran, the position of Iraq. So we need realpolitik, okay? As we cannot save the world, I think we should try to save Europe. The other area that needs to be pacified is Libya. And that, I think, is going to be more difficult than Syria. Because Syria, if we reach an agreement with Russia and Turkey, there are good chances that things will calm down. But Libya is completely out of control. And I think Libya is going to be the most difficult issue. But for sure, I'm not talking about bombing yet again. I'm talking about diplomacy and serious negotiation.
Thank you. There was a question at the bottom over there. No, at the very bottom there.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is John McCowan. I'm a research fellow at ICSR. My question for you is, you talk about these journalists who are no longer going to Syria, freelancers, and obviously you can't take them very easily if they're not there. What about local Iraqis, local Syrians? I think ISIS benefits a lot from them these days, like local businessmen, local tribal leaders they might kidnap. Will they do more so in the future? I'm curious what you have to say about that. Thank you.
ISIS has not really engaged in this kind of business at all. On the contrary, the approach to the local population has been you join us. I mean, they have a very strong nationalist approach. So the tribal leader, all the Sunni tribal leaders, so they will never do anything like that. There are no money in that kind of business. I mean, anybody that was wealthy in those regions has already left. I mean, it's only the poor. You saw the images of East Aleppo. Those are the really, really poor people. And of course, nobody cares about them. So no, I don't think ISIS will get engaged in this kind of activity. There may be kidnapping for political reasons, but I doubt it, to be honest, that there is going to be a financial activity. It is the foreigners that they want, and the foreigners are not there anymore.
Antonio.
Hi, Antonio Sampaio here from the IISS. I remember, I'm not sure if it was in 2015, I think it was 2015, in which there was a summit of European leaders about the migrant crisis, and I remember the main outcome of that was that, oh, we're going to tackle these smuggling groups, you know, these bad people who traffic, and then, oh great, now everything's sorted. But then, of course, how do you, and then there was speculation, are you going to bomb boats? So it seems that organized crime and these smuggling networks are a big chunk of the problem. So what has been done and what could be done in the future to disrupt these networks? I know from my experience in talking about organized crime in Latin America that intelligence plays a big part on that, but of course Latin American countries are much stronger than, you know, Syria and Iraq are now. So how to disrupt these networks? Wouldn't that be a more a possible short-term solution for a security solution for this problem?
You mean, okay, so you mean we disrupt the network inside Europe? I think it's going to be impossible because as the network is built by themselves, you disrupt one group, and then a week later there'll be a new group. It's too good to let it go. So here you are a migrant, you have moved, you managed to get into Europe maybe in 2010. You're not integrated, so you're stuck with that group of people that come from your country. Then all of a sudden Angela Merkel opened the gates of Europe, and then you get people coming from your country in the hundreds of thousands, and everybody wants a ride on a car or on a bus from one place to the border, and you happen to have a car. I mean, of course you're going to do it. I mean, you do it because you think it's a good thing. You do it because it's good money. I mean, so how are we going? This is what I was saying. What I was saying is this is a new form of criminality. And it's a new form of criminality which is linked to a major change in what is happening between us, Europe, and the neighboring countries, which have been under this threat for a very long time. So I don't think that, I think we have to go to the source of the problem. I mean, this is not smuggling cocaine. This is smuggling people coming from your village. So morally also, how are you going to say don't do it? I mean, of course people do it for the money. Of course terrible things happen. I mean, in my book, I mean, this was a really stressful book for me because I sat in front of people that told me this and this happened to me, and I thought, whoa, it was incredible. So there is evil in all of that, but there is also good. So I don't think we can do that. I don't think we can apply those models that we had before. We need to think outside the box.
Okay, the gentleman in the middle of the room.
My name is David Nordell. I'm from a cybersecurity think tank. Can you comment on the very 21st century form of kidnapping, which presents basically no risk at all to the kidnappers, the kidnapping of data and of information systems,
Cybercrime.
called ransomware, basically, which is one of the forms of cybercrime. It's known that it's being used for financing terrorism. The recently retired head of the City of London Police, Adrian Leppard, has done a lot of work on the subject of the relationship between cybercrime and the funding of terrorism. And it seems to me that this is something that is not being looked at seriously enough, and it's got, frankly, much bigger financial potential for terrorist groups than conventional kidnapping.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an area that very few people know, for the simple reason that it's not reported. Now, some of the kidnapping also is not reported. I mean, of people is not reporting because, again, this is all mystery. This is all you should not talk. So sometimes corporation pay the ransom for their own people without even saying that their own people has been kidnapped. But the data is absolutely enormous. On a daily basis, this happens. So hackers get into your company, they block the money flows, they block the accounts, they steal your clients' list, anything like that. And then the blackmail happens. So if you don't pay within a certain time, we will destroy your database. Yes, absolutely. The Caliphate, the Islamic State, has done that. We have no proofs, but they claim they have done it, and I believe that they did. Potentially, now that there are no foreigners that could be in those regions, that could be one of the most important sources of terrorist financing. But then again, it's not an area that is researched sufficiently. As I said before, we're always one step behind. And finally, there is the element of panic. So we don't say certain things because we are afraid the people will panic. So imagine what would happen in the banking system if all of a sudden the fragility of the electronic banking system is exposed because the banking system is fragile. So that's another problem. Yeah.
Second row and then first row.
Yes, thanks. Peter Asprey, member of the Institute. Two questions, if I may. One very quick, which is just, do you have any sense of, are all migrants being trafficked, or is it just a percentage of them? And the second question is more general. You're talking about, saving Europe, or I understand that's a kind of a simplistic term, but against that, there are a lot of people in Europe, it seems to me anyhow, who are heavily invested emotionally, financially, business, in the whole concept of open borders. So what's the prospect of this sort of perspective that you're proposing gaining any real traction? Do you see any progress on that front? Thank you.
So what was his first quick question?
If all the
The
migrants
first
are
question was, are all migrants being trafficked?
Okay, so about 90% of the migrants pay a facilitator. Trafficking is not the right word. I would say smuggling is the correct word. Pay a facilitator in order to get out. Of course, there are people that come legally through the reunification policies with the families. But I would say that 90% of the people are actually paying somebody. The concept of open borders, frankly, I think without global governance, open borders doesn't make any sense. I cannot open the borders if I don't have one authority that controls all the territory. So what? Look what's happened when in 2015 in Europe. So Hungary was supposed to open the borders so the people would get to Germany. Angela Merkel said, okay, I'll take them. So all the Hungary had to do was to let them cross. And the borders were open because there was Schengen. And then all of a sudden, Hungary closed the borders because they wanted control. Now, there is the Hungarian authorities, political authorities, they did not want not to have control on the people that were crossing its territory. But still, we are in the EU. So, do you see the contradictions? So no, I think the concept of globalization, open borders, everything that is open is good, is as bad as the concept that everything that is closed is good. We need to strike the right balance, and we seem to be unable to strike the right balance. We swing from being anti-globalization, racist, the most negative elements of nationalism, to be absolutely pro-globalization, opening our arms to the world. I mean, we got to find the right equilibrium, because otherwise bad times are coming.
Okay. First row, the gentleman over here.
Thank you. Tim Verity, a member of the Institute. I speak to a number of immigration people, and one thing that comes up is the idea of doing on a much bigger scale than they are doing here, which is gathering people into an area, into camps, if you like, sorting out the difference between economic migrants and refugees. And that can be done very easily, very quickly. Send back the economic migrants, and most of them are economic migrants, and keep the refugees who have a good story and a good background and justify help that we can give them. But by that means we're not being swamped by them, which we are basically being swamped at the moment. And we can send them back, and the message is it doesn't pay to come to Europe, okay, unless you have a very good story. Your idea in the long term about building up economics of the region is very good, because what we're seeing now is just the tip of the iceberg on migrants. It's going to carry on for years and years unless we do something very strongly about it.
Yeah, well, this is a very good point about the difference between economic migrants and political refugees. I can tell you that in Italy, everybody who comes in gets humanitarian status of refugees, because the migrant who comes to Europe because he cannot survive in his own country, because there are no jobs, there is climate, there are lots of climate change phenomena that force people also to migrate. So the stories are many, and it's very difficult to verify who is saying the truth and who is not saying the truth. Most of these people come without passport, without any documentation. So, in fact, in the book there is a story of somebody exactly like that. So, I think that would be a difficult process, but yes, of course it can be applied. The problem is that if we do something like this without a long-term policy in the countries where they're sent back, we run the risk that these people go back and join the closest jihadist groups to their home because they're angry, because they're frustrated, and because they have no other choice. And again, if you come from a place where you either become a jihadist and a criminal, or become a migrant, we may be pushing these people in the direction where they will become our enemies. So I think it's extremely complex. So maybe we can send these people back and give them the opportunity to start a small business. Maybe we can get microcredit involved. I mean, gosh, there's so much we can do. But if somebody doesn't sit down and produce a plan, we'll sink into this.
Okay. I have three people on my list, the gentleman over there, and then second row.
James Drummond from HSBC. I think you said in the course of your talk that IS has earned $85 million from kidnapping.
Between 75 and 80 million dollars. Yeah.
How did you arrive at that number? Or is it public?
That number was given to me by the negotiator. They actually negotiated the ransom for the people that were.
Presumably there were several negotiators.
Well, there were several negotiators, but there was one negotiator. So there were several negotiators for the different countries, but there was one negotiator that negotiated directly with the, yeah.
All the kidnappings of foreigners?
Well, the kidnappings, there were not many that were actually released, but there was one guy that was actually the one who kept the contact with the negotiator of the Islamic State. So, for example, the Spanish negotiators was the government. They would go through this individual in order to talk to the Islamic State. That, again, was a new methodology which worked very well. So they negotiated with the Spaniards first, then they negotiated with the French, then they negotiated with the German and Danish. So they did one country by one country, and everything went through this guy. So that's why I told you that figure.
Okay. We have the lady over there, please.
Hello, Valerie Smith from Cabinet Office. I'm an Africa analyst. I'd certainly agree with you that the security issue is a very important problem as it's impacting Europe. If you look at the amount of money being generated, it's likely it is going to corrupt systems in the places that it is sort of wafting around. So I certainly think looking at it from that perspective is really important. What I'm less sure about is the distinction between criminality and terrorist financing. Because if you look at the West Africa route, then AQM, they're a very significant group, but they're not huge. So the migrant flow is huge. So therefore, their role within it, I suspect, is extremely partial at certain bits of the route. And by the time they get to the Libyan coast, it's actually pretty straightforward criminal groups. That's what I would judge. And then the other distinction where I was a bit uncomfortable in your talk was Somali piracy doesn't, to me, fit into a model of terrorist financing. So I just wonder about if you could say a little bit more about that breakdown between, of course we all know there's overlap, but in terms of these enormous amounts of money being generated by kidnapping or by migration, what proportion do we really think is in the hands of terrorists?
Yeah, I mean, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb is not, well, it's all explained in the book, but the participation, maybe in the speech was not clear, but the jihadists or the terrorist organization are not traffickers. They participate in the trafficking, either facilitating crossing of a territory or being part of this business, as I said, totally decentralized, so certain part of the journey is covered by them, absolutely. So it's not that Al-Qaeda in Maghreb takes people from Chad and carries them all the way to Sirte, absolutely not. But no other group does. So, it's a mix of criminality and jihadists all the way down the road. The piracy is terrorist financing because, pirates, absolutely. I mean, I do not find any distinction between Al-Shabaab and pirates. I mean, that's terrorism to me, I mean, if you put a bomb, if you kill people, if you kidnap people, hijack ships, you are a terrorist.
But you see pirates and Al-Shabaab as the same group then?
No, absolutely no. I didn't say that. Al-Shabaab is a group, and its name is Al-Shabaab. It's an Islamic group. The pirates are the pirates. But they are terrorists. Absolutely. I mean, of course, there is not a definition of terrorism. There are, millions. But, if you kidnap people, if you kill people, if you hijack ships, to me, and you use terrorist methodology, you're a terrorist. And you do it for money. So the idea that, I mean, what is the best definition of terrorism? The best definition of terrorism is the definition of Professor Gilbert, And that definition says terrorism is a crime with war aims. That fits the pirates. Because the pirates also had a war aim, which was, to control, conquer a certain territory in Somalia, to become the authority of that territory. A warlord would fit that definition. So yes, Al-Shabaab does not participate with the pirates. I mean, two things. There are situations where Al-Shabaab has facilitated a certain kind of protection in the territory controlled by Shabaab to pirates, for example, harbors where they were hiding ships and things like that. But to me, they're all terrorists.
Okay.
Hi, thank you very much. Caitlin Vito with the Institute. I think you raised a really good point that with regards to migration question, that we need a common policy. And my question would be, is there anything that's giving you hope at the moment that you're seeing in terms of us coming to a consensus that there is somewhat of a common policy or plan?
In Europe?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
No. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, let's hope we
It's
can
terrible.
finish on a more
It's terrible to
positive
finish
note.
on this note.
No, but that's why we have another question, so I hope that a positive message will come out after all. So.
Hello, Daria Lange, just an Oxford student, sorry. It's just a clarification question, because you said earlier that people invested in the pirates, but it wasn't you earlier said that people invested in the pirates and got 70% of returns.
Mm-hmm.
So, but now you said it wasn't the terrorists, so who exactly invested in the pirates?
The people that invested in pirates is the diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
So people from Somalia who had migrated and living abroad, they would invest their capital so that the pirates could charter a ship and could also pay people in order to carry out the hijacking. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just misunderstood.
Yeah, it's like, well, you can call it a form of sponsor of terrorism. The Gulf states bankrolled the Islamic State in 2011, 2012, and their interest was not financial but political in order to fight against the regime of Assad. These guys invest in the pirates, and their aim being financial only, so to get a high return. So yes, you could put it also in that way.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we have reached the end of the allotted time. I'm sure you'll all agree we had a very stimulating discussion, so I will first thank Dr. Napoleoni for her presentation, but also all of you for your questions and comments. So thank you again for coming to ISS.